Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. It's an honor to be here in the National Mall, and thank you to Catharsis for setting up all of this great tech and putting all the time to bring us all out here together. So Symposia does drug lectures and conferences around the East Coast, but the thing that we've been doing lately that's been the most powerful is the storytelling. It turns out that somebody delivering a story from the heart for 10 minutes, you can often get a more important lesson than you can from an hour-long slideshow. And that's why we were so excited to be part of this, to get these stories out, to show part of the horrors that the war on drugs causes here amongst us. And so I want to start with a really powerful speaker, Benouis. And he was in the U.S. Army. He was a pilot of a Black Hawk helicopter, and he was in Panama for Operation Just Cause. Then later he went to be a rep for Pfizer, and he was an intellectual properties attorney as well. And then he became a casualty of the war on drugs for cannabis. And for the last 20 years, he's been healing himself through his own spiritual practice that involves plant medicines. And now his hope is to keep continuing to heal his fellow veterans using such practices. And so to Benouis.
Thank you. So what I figured I'd do is just, where this is storytelling, is tell my story. And if I had any time at the end, open it up for questions. So I grew up in Hawaii, and it was awesome. It was in the 70s, 3 years behind Obama. So cannabis was totally part of the culture. It was decriminalized. There was no drug trade, because even though drugs came in, there was all the homegrown cannabis. And it was an island culture, and it was totally integrated. And I remember the day I had this aha moment. My brothers and I were, kicking a soccer ball or throwing a football around in our neighborhood, and it went over into the neighbor's yard. This Japanese couple, and maybe in their 60s, retired, and they had 2 huge pot plants in their backyard. And I was like, everybody smokes pot. So, but it was integrated, and after I left Hawaii, I missed all the DARE education, but after I left Hawaii, they started Green Harvest, right, which was the first use of U.S. military in drug operations on U.S. soil, which violates posse comitatus, right? You're not supposed to use U.S. soldiers to conduct anything but, military operations, not drug operations. And so what that delivered to Hawaii, as they went around and did this eradication, was the country's first and worst meth epidemic. And now Hawaii's still in the grips of that. And to me, it's a pretty straight line between, clamping down on cannabis when you had no problems, and then causing a whole new problem. So again, an example, right, of prohibition, in this case, creating a problem that didn't even exist to begin with. So I went to West Point. Like Lex said, I was a Black Hawk pilot in the Army. Started deploying down to Panama in 1987, before Operation Just Cause. Basically preparing for that, and of course that was our big drug operation. And so I got out after that. I had, had a bunch of things happen to me. I almost drowned body surfing off Santa Cruz, and my house burned down, and the guy who burned my house down was ex-military. He robbed it, burned it down, and then when he's got help for his mental health issues and was due to stand trial later, he killed himself the night before he was supposed to, go to trial. Of course, we weren't, there's nothing we were prosecuting in that, but it was the state taking over. And so I got out of the military, but those things happening to me kind of started my personal spiritual quest. And I got out of the Army, moved to Austin, Texas. My first wife left me, and that's when I'd been kind of sober at certain times in the Army, just because I saw the dangers of alcohol on deployment and people medicating with that. And so MDMA, MDMA was, back in high school, growing up in Hawaii, it was alcohol, cannabis, mushrooms. They grew all around my high school. And but MDMA was the thing that kind of opened me back up as I started on my spiritual path. And then from there, it just, it took off. So I basically spent the first 3 years of law school in Houston, in the first 3 years of my new marriage to my wife that I've been married 21 years, I have 4 kids. And so we kind of I got my basic work sorted out enough where I could be a husband and a dad, and my wife and I got a good setup to our marriage by basically tripping every other weekend at least for about 3 years on mushrooms. So so then I really my kids were really my medicine for the next 20 years or so. And I taught my kids to get high in their own supply. I taught them properly. I was honest with them and upfront with them, and we go out in the backyard on our trampoline and just bounce for hours and play games. And I would tell them, this is you're making yourself feel good. You're making yourself get high in your own supply. And what that means then is that if you choose later to do something that's additive to it, right? You're not trying to cure some problem. And then if you're trying to do that, then that's your body trying to tell you that something else is wrong, and maybe that medicine is good for you, or maybe there's some other medicine or some other thing you can do. So and I'll even tell you real quick how I had that conversation with my kids about drugs, because I know that it is a big challenge when this is so illegal. How do you have that conversation? They were about 14 to, I want to say 9 or something, around in that range. And I had 3 of them with me. Went to a soccer tournament in Houston at a hotel there where they had just mulched the ground with all this, cow manure mulch. And it had just had a big rain. So I remember driving in the parking lot, and my mushroom sense was all tingling. I'm like, there's something going on around here. And like, Dad's going to go downstairs and walk around the hotel for a little while and come back, And so I came back with probably what ended up being about, 60 or 70 grams eventually of dried mushrooms. So it was a pretty good haul, just right there in the hotel parking lot. And so, my kids definitely, we were going to talk about that, right? There was no way that we're not going to talk about that. And so they're like, so the mushrooms, what's the deal with that? And I said, okay, knives. Good or bad, throw it out to the audience. And they're like, good, because you can cut your food with it, or bad because you can, hurt somebody with it. And I said, well, there you go. Mushrooms a knife is technology. Mushrooms are technology. Treat them appropriately, respect them. They'll do good things for you. But I also had that kind of crazy DPS or Child Protective Services, conversation where I said, look, we have to be able to keep secrets in our family. And I'm not the kind of secrets like dad's sexually abusing you. No, not that kind of secret. This kind of secret like you didn't get what you want, so you're mad at dad, so you decide to call 911 and say, my dad's got all sorts of stuff in here. That's not going to do anybody any good. But being honest with my kids, I believe, has really helped. And, and I've been growing these plants for 20 years as well. So when they see, you growing these plants, growing and taking these plants versus, going to the pharmacy and a prescription, they can kind of on their own figure out, right, what drugs are and, not fall into this whole predefined, system that the government's trying to, propagate to everyone. And so, let's see. So I got out of the Army, started that spiritual path. I was a pharmaceutical rep for Pfizer. Really at the height of, we launched Zoloft. That was the height of the synthetic opioids, which were all marketed and they've always been marketed this way. Same with heroin compared to morphine, right? Oh, this newer version of this thing, is less addictive than the old one. So actually, this thing will cure the addiction to the lower level, right? The less complex opioid. And so I saw some of the good that the pharmaceutical industry could do, but I also saw that they're really just looking for customers. They want magazine subscriptions. They're not trying to cure things. They're just trying to get people on maintenance drugs and have them be on them the rest of their lives. And so I said I went to law school, studied intellectual property. While I was in law school, hanging out with a newer friend that I'd met down at Barton Springs in Austin. If anyone's been there, kind of the soul of Austin. Yeah, hanging out in the overflow, the free part where all the freaks hang out. And, he's like, hey, man, you want to smoke some herb? I'm like, sure. But violated the number one rule, in my opinion, right, is don't take any more or any form that you can't immediately dispose of if law enforcement shows up. So law enforcement hiding out in the bushes saw us, came up, you guys were smoking pot? And he's like, do you have any still? And he like, pulls out his bag of a quarter ounce. I'm like, oh my God, dude. And fortunately for me, it was Austin, Texas. They have a real official program now called Sight and Release, but I got a basically early version of that. So it was a year and a half through law school, I think, or maybe the first year. I can't remember. A year and a half. I was in the second year, and so I had. They wrote it down to drug paraphernalia. So I wasn't arrested, but I was given a Class C misdemeanor ticket right there. I had to go to drug classes. I paid, if anybody knows from Texas, Jamie Belasia, the 420 dude. He was my attorney. It cost me $3,000 to get it expunged, to get it out of my record, so that I could, be able to take the bar and become an attorney. And so I used some of the mushroom money, my mushroom scholarship from picking mushrooms. I did deliver about 10,000 1-gram doses to Austin between 94 to 97, saying the name of God over every one of them, and that was some of my early political activism. But keeping Austin weird. So statute of limitations, it's all good, right? It's all pass. But So for me, thank God that I was able to. That I had that money, that I had that privilege, and to be able to get my record expunged, so I could do the thing that I wanted to do. And since then, I've been an attorney, kind of working in the corporate world, and like I said, raising my kids, and maybe with my wife taking MDMA a couple times a year is a great marriage tool, and to do our work with each other and psychedelics more occasionally. And then about a year and a half ago, I went to the first Veterans Normal Conference in Texas and just connected with veterans, and that was kind of the beginning for me of Healing 2.0. I'm like, I'd done enough work so I could, like I said, be a good human being, be a good father and a husband and a wife and all that. And but I still had a lot of work to do. I found out when I met veterans, and I would certainly say too that my PTSD is not caused by combat anyway, maybe flying in the Army, which is really dangerous, and sexual trauma and car accidents and other stuff. But I want to share with you how real and deep this drug war goes. My mother has been an opioid addict for 40 to 50 years with degenerative disc disease. My youngest brother has been an opioid addict his entire adult life. And then my other brother, my other sibling, is third time through rehab, and so far, successfully. But I've seen the choices that other people in my family have made, and I've really tried to make better ones. And so, for me, meeting with veterans was really the beginning of my, like I said, rehealing process, and connecting with veterans. And for me, then starting my own healing process again, which has involved mainly, personally, ayahuasca. And I've been really then since then just trying to share that healing with other veterans. And what I want to do then is just share sort of two things I accomplished with these sacred plants as far as my traumas, just to really also share with you the power. And this whole time I've had a spiritual practice, and I've been doing yoga for 5 years, learned to do open-eyed meditation, and so all these techniques, right, they're all supportive of this kind of work. So back in May, I did a 3-day ayahuasca ceremony outside of Austin with a healer from the Santo Daime tradition, but it really wasn't a Santo Daime ceremony. 3 days, so the first day was really just getting my body all sorted out, just kind of clearing all the negative energy, kind of getting that, DNA scrub down to the, subatomic level. And then on the next day, it was really a bunch of heart polishing, so clear the negative energy, polish the heart, break it apart, put it back together, blow it up, rinse, wash, repeat, as many times as necessary. And when I was finally kind of Mother Ayahuasca taking me through that process, and I'm like, okay, cool, let's take this new heart out for a ride and see where we can go. And it immediately went to this sexual trauma that I had when I was in first or second grade, where I was sodomized by an older neighborhood boy in the bathroom of my own house. And so when I went to that place under the medicine, I saw the young me, and I saw this person, and your default thing in that scenario, your ego, right, is to go towards yourself. I'm like, the young me, but instead, my heart and my attention shifted towards this person, and I'm like, what happened to you? Why did this happen to you? Why are you doing this? Not in a, questioning, threatening, but like in a caring, compassionate, empathetic perspective. And when I did that, the whole emotional content of that memory just completely evaporated, and it was gone. So that was some amazing healing. And then a couple weeks later, I'd planned to do this conscious cannabis ceremony in Colorado with this healer who's a transpersonal counselor and done work in native traditions. And it was with cannabis because he wanted to test the proposition for vets especially, but it would be true for everyone, but prove it first with vets that you could use cannabis actually not just sort of as a maintenance for trauma, but also to deal with the trauma. And so we did a ceremony in his house with a little altar, and I was lying down on a kind of like a yoga mat on the rug of his the front room in his house, and it was a guided meditation with music that he had all queued up, and he was talking to me, but not really. I wasn't talking to him, he was just sort of guiding me. And I took 7 puffs of this, only cannabis. I hadn't smoked any that day, that was it. And I went into that psychedelic space. It was amazing. And I basically went to my first trauma, which was my sister dying when I was 9 months old, and she was a little bit less than 2, in a car with my parents and my grandfather and some other relatives. And I went there, and the short version is I got okay with everything and totally let go of it. And it was awesome. The same kind of thing like with ayahuasca, where the whole emotional trauma just literally evaporated. And just to throw a fun wrench in all this, Mother Ayahuasca came along as an attending physician for the whole process to make sure that it all worked out. So yeah, here I am today, and so I'm a veteran working to share this kind of healing with other people, and I'm really honored and blessed to be working with the rest of you in this movement to get these plants resacralized. And I'll just say the last thing is that, and I experienced this under ayahuasca, is that I came to the understanding that veterans are the moral conscience for this country, because we go and exercise the politicians' will and are the instruments, deliverers, and witnesses of these horrible things that no human being should experience. And then we have to come back and reintegrate, and there's no real plan or way that's currently set up to do that. And so I've seen that veterans are going to be the ones that get to prove this model, to show how we can turn ourselves from warriors that are killing machines into warriors that are loving machines that can actually beat our own swords into plowshares. And so that's what I see for veterans, and that's what I'm committed to. So thank you.